All right, so the more there was to say. But the great difference between the exterior and the interior of this building, because it looks like a forbidding, overpowering Hulk. So unlike what Procopius has just been saying, right? Suspended, God present from the heavens. This looks so like a toad just hunkered down on the ground, although big. I wanted to do a bit more on architecture and the use of domes and arches and how that's making this all possible. So this, is the revised dome after the first one fell, still within Justinian's lifetime. And the son of one of the original architects designed this. But whatever the original one also, although lower within this, was always a circle set in a square. So I believe last time I avoided the word about what makes that possible. And this whole thing about how do you support a dome? Because on the dome at all points, this is like, you must have all heard this multiple times. It's good for me to review it for myself. You have all the force of gravity pulling it down. So what keeps the dome up when there's nothing underneath? If the dome is made of a series of wedge-shaped blocks, each block holds the other in place because they can't fit through the narrower opening at the bottom side. Well, where's that weight going to go? It wants to spurt out to the side because you have up above pushing, so it would slide out. You have to have something somewhere to help hold up that weight. Now at the Pantheon, you can see how it's done, that the half dome is actually sort of sunk down in the building. So there's very, very heavy masonry all around, making that extra collar, all that gray stuff to hold it in place, because it's just at the bottom where the greatest thrust would be. And that's what's utterly violated here. And then if you've got this dome on a square, next issue, you do it by having below the dome, something is in contact all the time, because otherwise you'd have rain falling in the building. But these are these spherical triangles, and they have the name pendentive, like pendulous, something that hangs. So they take all the weight of that dome and just by other arches being held in place by being held against one another down to the corners. So that's the work. And this kind of reconstruction of the interior. So it would be those spherical triangles that you see there. So we go back to look at the interior. So where's the weight being held? This is a powerfully massive, we can't weigh it now, but it's a very heavy dome. Do you see the pendentives? Yeah. And then what's below the pendentive? What takes the weight from them down to the ground? You got to be kidding. A column's going to carry all that? The wall could hold all of that? No way. On the other side of those buttresses are those pendentives. All the weight of the building is being held and pushed back against by these pendentives and the buttresses that you can only see from the exterior. So inside, there is nothing big, massive saying, I am doing the work of this building. Pushed out where you can't see it. And then this cross section of it shows probably what the original lower dome would have been like, a little bit more nestled in the building. And then after it was revised and goes up and has the windows put in there around the base. So now we do the unthinkable, the impossible, and lie on your back in the church. Just to look up above how you have not only that sense of that's therefore like this floating dome, but then as it makes its way down to the ground, it's other curving semicircles and semicircles. So it's just this like nice cascade as it comes down to the ground. It's not as if it were something going up. So that's for the length of the church. And this is if you look at the side walls. And yes, the light does come in. So at times of the day, when the light is very bright, the little buttresses between the windows can't be seen. So in places, it looks like there is no connection between the dome and what's down below. There's another change that has been made some point in the past from a kind of daring do that was just too daring. That semicircle wall above the two colonnades, which has many windows, and you'll notice there's a 7 and a 5. Those are holy numbers. And at least in the West, it was a profound belief that buildings could be held up by having the right proportions and the right numbers, because they are part of God's creation. And as God's creation is built on a numerical system. Well, think of how many things are 40 days and 40 nights, for example. So they were originally, part of what's under that arch was all glass. We don't, or alabaster, thin panels of alabaster, not glass. We don't know exactly how much wall there was there. But so there would have been even more light coming in at the upper level. So that's what Procopius is talking about when those walls were glistening and bright colored in their purples and whites and greens. And just as in the Pantheon, people who were specialists and loved marbles in this era would be able to recognize where those stones came from. So there was a sense that in here, just as in the Pantheon, the whole world, the whole Byzantine world is represented, is there on the walls, under the domain of God, ruled by Justinian and the Patriarch. Now, it's not that they were oblivious, ignorant of the fact that those columns don't line up. One more quote. Let's see about. Oh, well, so this area where you can look at those marbles, that's the base of one of those where the pendentives come down. See, and again, it's just glittering. You just look at the surfaces, you don't see, there's a bulk there at all. So in this corner, another writer who wrote at the time of the second dedication, commenting about these corners where the wall bulges out as if space is pushing it out. He's saying, these are adorned not with 2 columns, but with 6. And one may wonder at the resolve of the man who upon 2 columns has bravely said, 3 times 2 is not shrunk from hanging them over empty air. So they're fully aware of this sort of miraculous quality of it. That's a blurry photo. And even the walls where they're not those gleaming, reflecting marbles, you have stonework that is cut as if it's tracery. So it looks like it's just paper thin and cut out. Or the capitals. It looks as if that's just a piece of paper wrapped around a void. You can't see the solid in there. So systematically, in every way possible, this building is made to look as if it weighed nothing. So this would be our view, is our view now. The last I wanted to say a little more about this building. I will tell you that when it was consecrated, Justinian is reported to have said, walking in, Solomon, I have surpassed thee. Because, of course, the standard of them all is the temple, Solomon's temple, and that he's now exceeded what Solomon has done. I want to try to imagine what it would be like if we were one of those able to be there, even at this level where we could be, since we're not in the clergy and we're not part of the imperial family. They're on the ground floor. There are silk curtains hung between each of those columns. And the church service is full of processions. So the priests walk forward, walk back, walk around. There's some more of the ceremony. Walk some more. So you'd hear the sound would disappear, and you wouldn't see where people were. So you have this sort of like the mystery, an oral mystery, like you get a little here, a little there. So in all ways, it's incommensurate, immeasurable, ununderstandable. Paid for by confiscating the property of all the nobility who helped back the insurrection that led to the destruction of the church. So that's that. And we go west. Still staying in ecclesiastical architecture because that's where the tall buildings were created. Because still, as you know, space, if it's tall, it's not going to be used for habitation. So we're going to, again, work with that idea of these domes and arches representing aspiration to move beyond the earthly world. Looking at this, you're not going to guess that, because this is background information. That's just a model of the church of the old St. Peter's before the church you now see. And it's a standard kind of church, and it's called a basilica. I mean, you go to churches now. Actually, this is a little bit of terminology for people who aren't in certain Christian groups. Basilica doesn't mean important. It doesn't mean anything. It refers to the shape, that it's a long hall with an altar, a major space at one end. Maybe it has aisles, maybe it doesn't. And basilicas were made by Romans. They used them anywhere. You could even make a barn in the shape of a basilica. And that is that plain shape that was used at St. Peter's. The other thing we often think of now, really a 20th century thing almost, is this, it's the shape of a cross, because you see at the far end down near where the altar would be, there's a extension to the sides. We can think of it as a cross mainly because we're accustomed to looking at things from the air. At the time, they weren't thinking of this as representing a cross. Those were spaces that had other functions for the priests. So this is a standard Western shape, long, maybe an extension, and at the far end, a projecting area, the holiest part, which was where the altar would be. And if you had a sort of a standard garden variety one, but big, where you had a large crowd, and you'd have a large crowd who needed space to circulate. And services were never held with people seated. It was always standing and processing. To get any light into that main center space, you have to have some differentiation in the height of the ceiling. Because if you had windows only at the exterior, it'd be terribly murky by the time you got to the middle, because so little light would filter in. And you want focus on the middle. So you raise the ceiling and you put windows at that upper level. So you get most light coming in right down the center of the church. And so you can see, and then you have little windows letting light get from one section to the next. Oh, they used arches as well. They certainly knew arches. This is a Santa Sabina from the early 5th century that I showed you last time. So they use arches for the windows, arches over the columns. And so that's early 5th century. And now you're looking at something from the 10th, 11th centuries. This is St. Michael's in Hildesheim in Germany. You don't see any churches very often, even in books, unless they're very specialized, from the period between the late Roman ones and this, because they were in the West extremely humble structures. So much of the knowledge of building trades, handling the materials and the construction principles had been lost as the nomadic people came in who hadn't been building at all. So only gradually was that regained by people beginning to look at aqueducts or bridges and understanding again how they were built, how they were put together. And this new knowledge shows itself in churches because church was the single most prosperous, most stable organization throughout the whole Middle Ages. And this church in Germany is one that belongs to the Benedictines. And that's the religious order of the Benedictines are very responsible for the great buildings of that time. But you can see here too, already they're trying to get height. Look at the towers at both ends. So that as you come from the distance, this is something significant ahead of us. As a kind of stray thought, as stray thoughts come into my mind, this morning I thought, what if the Statue of Liberty were half its height? Do you think it would have any of the degree of consequence and dignity and importance, even if it were inscribed in the same way it is now? I don't. I mean, this size, it carries a meaning in itself. And this is what St. Michael's looks like within. You see, they're going for height. That's space that carries religious meaning. Of course, there was originally decoration, which has been stripped away over time. This is on the UNESCO World Heritage Site as a very important church to see. Yeah.
Was it just the light, or were there different? Like it looked like they're all different types of brick.
Yeah, there's some stone, there's some brick, and
is it done in pieces over the years?
It's the way it's done, but it's been restored from time to time. So I think you'd have to go through sort of forensically bit by bit to see which is. And it has still the original wooden ceiling. So what's this about wooden ceilings now? What's the problem with wooden ceilings? You go plenty high. You could just build the wall and have that. Why am I talking about vaults all the time? Well, you have problems if you have wood. Easier to build, material perhaps more accessible sometimes. doesn't take the same kind of knowledge among Masons, and it's utterly flammable. So in buildings that are lighted by candles and in the tall buildings on a landscape where lightning would be attracted, it was almost inevitable. You look at the histories of those buildings, so many years, fire, so many years, fire. That's going to look at Chartres next time. So many years, fire. So to have a structure that was solidly masonry would be the ideal. Like that. This is there's a series of churches of the late 11th, 12th century, in an era that takes its name actually from the design of these buildings. It's called the Romanesque age. And that's a modern name for it. For them, it was just now, it was the modern age. It's because it has Roman arches revived, those rounded arches. And this is a church in southern France, not the one we're going to concentrate on, but you get the sense of it. And one of the precipitating reasons for many of these was because of this person. Now, this actually is an alabaster statuette that's in the cloisters, but it's of St. James the Greater. Depends on faith or legend, exactly how you interpret this. Oh, anyway, James was one of Jesus's first followers. Jesus called him from a fishing boat, him and his brother, and say, "Follow me." And he was also, according to the Bible, the first follower of Jesus who was martyred for his faith. The story, I'll just say story, the history of it is, as they say, it's like a lot of history, you believe it or you don't believe it, was that during his fairly brief lifetime, he went to Spain and he converted the Spanish people to Christianity. And then he went back to the Holy Land before he was martyred. So he would be one of the first to spread Christianity in the West. Then there are various legends about how it is that his bones ended up back in Spain. There are 3 different stories, and anyway. A bishop in the 9th century was alerted by some cleric that he'd come across a grave of some antiquity. It had 3 bodies in it. And the bishop said, well, this is St. James. And that was accepted. So that the body of St. James is thought to be in northwest Spain. That's why you go to Santiago de Compostela. And those pilgrimages to Santiago started really flourished in the 11th and 12th centuries as Europe was sort of resurging. So there you see Compostela over there. There actually survives a guidebook from this time for going on a pilgrimage there. Now, taking a pilgrimage was essential. Some criminals were assigned to go on a pilgrimage to visit a venerated site to see the relics of some venerated figure, or people wanted to before they died. The primary 3 would be to the Holy Land, utterly inaccessible. So that would be where Christ died, or to Rome, where St. Peter died. And I don't know why, but that was also quite difficult, or to the tomb of St. James. And there developed certain routes. They're just called the pilgrimage roads. Now people take the Camino just across the top of Spain. But some started in England and came down, some came from Germany. And these are the main routes through France. They were called the gold scattering streams. And the Benedictine order was largely in charge of the buildings along the way, hostels for people to stay overnight, and the construction of churches. I have out from the library here, and I will return. There's one, yes, there's a guidebook, a modern guidebook that tells you, go here, this is what's left of the former one here, you can walk on this, and this is the same bridge. You can recreate all the. So this is Santiago, the Cathedral in Santiago de Compostela, which is from this period, but it was not finished then, and it's, so I'm not looking at it in its, oh dear, don't want to do that. That's their ultimate goal. Break for more construction. So now if you have single arches, how you're holding those up? First, you've got this arcade. That's the simplest, right? And it shows, you don't need to memorize those names if you don't know them yet, but you can see how the diagonal thrust from one is met by the diagonal thrust of the one adjacent to it. And then that gets funneled down to the ground in between. So who's been to Nîmes, you know, like the great Roman bridge in Nîmes or the aqueducts? Ultimately, the thrust goes over to the ground at either side, because each one just defers it along to the next. But that's, you can think of that for the width of a bridge. If you want to make a ceiling out of it, you can just extend it this in length, in depth. No problem, unless you want light. You can have light at both ends, but woe be if you put it in the sides. Because that's where all the heavy material that's holding the arches up, absorbing all that thrust is. You begin to weaken not just the wall, but the whole arch the minute you open it up there. If you put windows in a structure with an arch like this, all the way down the length, they're going to be small. And they're small and they're going through thick walls. Okay, you can get around that by doing them, making two at right angles to one another. You see why it'd be called a groin vault, because it's by the intersection. One hits the other, they take that force, they take it to the four corners. It has to be over a square space, probably, so that the arches are the same height. But now you can open it up on the side. And you could have something like this. Except there's one other thing. If you're still staying with just semicircular arches, the arch that goes diagonally across one of those units that's going to be the diameter, that radius is much greater on the diagonal. So in theory, a really good one is going to go billow up in the middle, not just have that level crown. So you know what's going to happen in the Gothic age. They're going to point the arch. Why be beholden to semicircular? You can point them and bring them up to the same height, no matter the width of the space they span. But if you don't, this is a church in Milan named San Ambrogio. You see what happens? You sort of don't want, well, you don't want to look at where it says Dreamstein all the way, but also if the focus is to be down at the altar and the service going on down there and the relics down there, it's a little bit distracting to have woo, woo in the ceiling, light and dark, billowing stop. It just doesn't keep you focused. So we'll see what architects hired by the Benedictines do, and just the smallest fragment of what's left of what was for several hundred years the biggest church in the world. That's at Cluny. That is the home church in France of the Benedictine order. Had very wealthy benefactors and wealthy abbots. And this is what it all looked like originally. It was essentially almost a town. And significant enough that there are even manuscripts that show when the altar was dedicated by the Pope, came up to dedicate it. It's almost completely destroyed during the French Revolution. It was no longer used as a church, and then the state sold the stone to anybody who wanted to buy stone for other buildings. So there's just a smidge of it left. And there've been, it's Cluny 3, there are 3 churches, but this is what it looked like inside, and that's a thought of what its height was. Its exterior. Each of these little semicircular protuberances down here, those are chapels. You could have a shrine in there, a relic in there. You could have people making donations there and walking in and around. Well, over ages, but this is around 1100. That's real rough date. That's looking at it from the area down by the altar. And this is the little bit that's left. This is, as you, well, I've got a pointer around here, but if you look at the far right, that little teeny tower, and then the tall one next to that, that's the only part of the church that's left. And that's it. And from the people walking, you see down there, you see it's large. This is just a small part of the church. And there you see the door into it, because I didn't even bother with dimensions. I mean, the main thing is it would have been overwhelming. You can't photograph this, but that can give you some idea. I see one person in here who's, any more people have been in there. It really is just astonishing. It's just like, lift the top off your head. So they experiment with lots of ways to do these tall churches, which were seen as heavenly Jerusalem. This is one that's nearby, and you can see how they are. It's not only Gothic cathedrals that towered over the towns. These were actually, the towns grew up around the buildings. Terribly homely, much altered exterior. And the interior. This kind of a weird building, which was considered, accepted as an anomaly, because it has those barrel vaults, but they run sideways. So there's one arch, a little bit of a barrel vault, another arch, another barrel vault, boom, 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 all the way down to the altar. You see the spaces there? Very narrow. So yet again, you just think of the upward dimension. And then I'm going to show you my most favorite. This is the church at Conques, Conques. You see it dominating this little town. You can see it from above. It's a church dedicated to the figure in this reliquary. Pilgrims came to see this reliquary. This is a reliquary of Saint Faith, Sainte Foy, who was, she died for her faith. She's burned on a brazier in the 2nd century. She died because she refused to worship the pagan gods. And she was an extremely popular saint in the Middle Ages. So people wanted to see her remains. And this was a Benedictine monastery here. A monk went to a nearby site, Agen, where Sainte Foy had lived and which had her body and had her relics. And the monk from Conques came home with that. So in 1886, her relics were stolen and brought to Conques. Because this is the best way you can make sure that you're going to have a big building. You get your relics from somewhere. This is not the only time that ever happened. Here she is carried in procession. And here she is. She is gem encrusted with a rather unusual head. Clearly the relic is the head. And there you see the head from the side. Since you can't dismantle a relic to see what it really is, there is some discussion. Is that head a portrait of a Roman emperor? Is that a young girl? A former director at the Met thinks it's the head of Charlemagne, but it's taken from some earlier source. It even has different gold on it. And then the body was added to it so that it's called like a speaking reliquary. The shape tells you what there is inside. So they're Roman gems, all kinds of stones in here, precious gems, semi-precious. And she performed many miracles. Among her miracles is someone she would go after people if they didn't contribute enough to the church. They would suffer all sorts of grievous damage. So just look some at the church. You see, it's not a large church because there's not much room in that hilly terrain for a expanding long nave, but we look inside and at the side. So the buildings that were the attached monastery are gone. Everything's very explicit. This is where it extends out where the altars are and the little chapels. And then you go in. Now, one thing that is so extraordinarily unlike, so definitively unlike Hagia Sophia, is that there's nothing here that's trying to dematerialize. This is a solid structure, and everything emphasizes weight and solidity. And even so, it soars way up just because of its proportions. But this is bulk, clear edges, nothing disappears. So you look up, and from the weight of those arches that carry the tunnel vault, you see how then on the outside, it shows, or inside, it shows how there's that half column saying, oh, it's thicker here because there's more weight, taking it down to the ground. It's like a diagram, inside, a 3D diagram of the forces at work in the building. I love this. That's a modernist sensibility in sculpture, I'm afraid, at work in me. So just imagine sitting in there. There would be color. And there would be hangings, not quite as austere as it looks now. Yeah. Oh, thank you. I'd have gone right beyond it. I didn't set you up for this either. This is the age of Gregorian chant. And Gregorian chant was planned for the intervals and the echoing in buildings like this. I just want to make sure I got to the, you get to see this. This is a sculpture over the doorway. This, often there would be, these churches, there'd be a little market square in front, or that's where people would gather. So the clergy, if they want to admonish people when they're not in service, you can use this space to get your message across. And this is the Last Judgment. And I want, this is, you see the top, the series of arches around the top of that? And do you see the little like irregularities in that top molding? That's where figures like this peek out.
Kilgore was here.
Absolutely. So this is Christ judging people. And of course, the good will be on his right side, and then the damned are on his left. And there's a part of this, well, there, to our entertaining now, but we're believed profoundly to be the truth at the time. Look at some sections of it. There's the image of the judging figure. And then these are the saints. Look how tidily they walk along. And the man holding the keys, that would be St. Peter's. Then there comes, I think the next one is, oh, he's a cleric, but I don't remember who. And then there's a abbot who leads the king. So it's the church is more important and rules the state in the order that's shown here. And just down below, the only place there's a little notch in the scheme, here's Sainte Foy. She was the patron saint of prisoners. So here she is, it's shown as if she's in jail, and you see her handcuffs up there. And this is Setter over the door. Toward the top, there's an angel and a demon in a face-off. Between them, there's a piece that's missing. It's a scale. They each have the pan of the scale. You just don't have the bar anymore. And the demon watching the angel to see if he can get away with this. Do you see the demon's putting his finger on the scale? He wants to get the next soul. Now, this is a market square. So there are people selling goods down below with scales like that. So you have this constant reminder of what happens if you do that. And then there, to one side, helpful angels letting the elect rise out of their tombs. On the other side, demons are doing their worst. And then they come down below at the separation point. A very gracious angel welcoming a couple into paradise.
Know what the Latin is saying? I don't know. It's just
Yeah, I know. I know. I'll have to look it up again too. One time I sort of knew.
a lot of writing.
And then, which not most of the people there could not have read. And then on the other side of that separator, look at that demon. Now, if you have your hair stand on end, think of this whenever you have troubles with your hair. When your hair stands on the end, it always represented being possessed by the devil. So you have your hair on end, and he's got this major threatening weapon. Oh, he looks so longingly over. If he could only get the ones that are on the other side of that post. And the poor suffering souls who've been judged. One has put his face down on his hiding, so he knows he has to go through the maw of hell there. He's ready, and someone else's feet just disappearing down the chute. And then the ones behind, shrieking in terror because their turn is coming. I love that demon. Look at all those teeth showing. And hell is chaotic horror, and all the 7 deadly sins are represented in here. Up above, 2 demons tormenting figures. Chaos, chewing on them, struggling with them. Look down below, you see somebody being roasted on a spit. Man being hung on his money bags. How's that for being a profiteer? And there's a couple caught in adultery who were bound together forever after. It's another one of the details in here. And then on the side of heaven. Oh, that's a pretty oblique view. Let's see. This is not as good color, but you can see what it is. It's seen as being gather me under the bosom of Abraham. So there are 2 little figures. Not as clear that way. So here. With their souls, trustingly putting their souls on his thighs. And then saints lined up neatly on either side. Under what? What is this lecture about? What setting here? A Romanesque church. Heaven is a Romanesque church. And heaven is order. And Romanesque architecture is not mystery, it is order. And you may now go. No, if you have questions, please go. Yes. It's the Church of Saint Foy, Saint Faith at Conques, and it is fabulous. Yes.
Images, this very detailed sculptures. This is all that door. All on that door.
There's no. So we think of that often with like Gothic churches, that they have a lot of sculpture and then you have the stained glass windows. But Romanesque churches, all churches, for people who are largely illiterate, they're using as many pictorial means as possible. So there would have been paintings, and often the capitals on columns have sculpture telling stories. If you're sitting inside and bored by the service, you always had something you could be watching that would be scaring you to death. Yeah, and a lot of that has disappeared, but yeah. Any more? No? Yes, yeah. You had a question? No? Yes. You can't see with my lazy eye, but I'm pointing at you. You. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I noticed that some of the arches on the interior had stripes of which is reminiscent of many of the monks. Yes, so was that?
This is the time of the Crusades, and influences from Arabic and well, of course you have Spain, so you have a lot of Arabic there. Yes, it's coming into the north. Yeah.
mark company. You know, people or what?
No, it's inspiration from that.
Thank
Yeah. Any more?
Plazas. At the back of this church in Conk, how large was that market space?
It's pretty small, actually.
Size of this room, maybe?
This room is bigger than that.
I'm wondering, so the church was built, this is around 1100, you said?
Uh-huh.
So when did it occur that churches in other parts of Western and Eastern Europe had these very large plazas around like that? Do you know when that kind of shifted? Because this church is clearly in a very difficult terrain, not a lot of space.
Mhm.
But then you go to other parts and you see this old history of churches at the center of the big, huge squares. When,
You know, I haven't the slightest idea. Yeah. Yes.
Thomas Owing thought that was the death master show. I mean, does anybody else, I mean, is this just the way out there theory or there are other?
Well, you can't, the thing is, the theories can just be wherever they are because you cannot examine it. I'm sure there's some who did and some who said, oh, that's just Thomas Hoving being Thomas Hoving. Goodbye. Goodbye. It's short next week.